On October 12, 1943, high over the Rhineland at 23,000 feet, B-17 Flying Fortress 4-23067 jolted violently when a 20mm cannon shell ripped through its No. 3 engine, sending black smoke streaming from the cowling. In the cockpit, First Lieutenant Robert Hayes felt the control yoke tremble as the aircraft's nose dipped 15 degrees. In the radio compartment, Sergeant Mike Donnelly watched hydraulic fluid spray across the fuselage like arterial blood. The bomber was failing fast, and England was still 140 miles away. Off to the right, First Lieutenant James Howell caught sight of the disaster. His P-47 Thunderbolt Jersey Thunder painted beneath the canopy banked sharply to follow the wounded fortress. Howell, a 24-year-old New Jersey farm kid with 312 combat hours and 72 missions behind him, knew what happened to stragglers. The formation continued on, as doctrine demanded. One damaged airplane couldn't jeopardize an entire group. Hayes understood this as well. Beside him, co-pilot Frank Morrison was already calculating 3 good engines, maybe 160 indicated airspeed, losing 200 feet per minute, enemy fighters circling for the kill. Howell keyed his radio. "Big friend, this is Jersey 27. I've got you in sight. Stay with me," Hayes answered, voice controlled but tight. "Jersey, we're losing hydraulics. No. 3's burning. Can't hold altitude." Howell replied, "Copy, big friend. I'm staying with you." A promise he wasn't supposed to make. His own fuel gauge showed 58 minutes left, maybe less, while the crippled bomber crawled at 140 knots. England lay 90 miles to the northwest, and the numbers didn't favor anyone. The mission had begun 6 hours earlier at Thorpe Abbotts, home of the 100th Bomb Group. Hayes and his crew were on their 19th sortie, a daylight precision strike on ball-bearing plants in Schweinfurt. Intelligence had predicted light resistance, but intelligence had been disastrously mistaken. Of the 320 B-17s crossing the Channel, more than 400 German fighters Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds and Focke-Wulf 190s rose from a dozen airfields to meet them, turning the sky into a slaughterhouse. Bombers burned and spiraled earthward as P-47 escorts fought hard, but lacked the range to stay. Nearly out of fuel, they turned back at the border. Hayes Fortress had been hit during the bomb run, flak bursting beneath the aircraft, shrapnel slicing through thin aluminum. Ball turret gunner Eddie Martinez took fragments in his left shoulder and waist. Gunner Tommy Briggs was knocked unconscious when metal smashed his helmet, but somehow didn't penetrate. Then came the fighters, 4 FW-190s diving from 11 o'clock high, cannons flashing. Top turret gunner Paul Richter poured 50 caliber fire into the lead attacker, ripping it apart in midair, but the remaining 3 pressed in, and then the No. 3 engine went down. 15 minutes after leaving the target, Hayes was fighting just to keep level flight as the bomber dropped through 22,000 feet. Morrison tried desperately to restart the ruined engine, but the prop windmilled uselessly, while the failing hydraulics froze the turrets and left the bomb bay doors partly open, adding drag. "Skipper," Morrison said quietly, "we should tell them to bail out." Hayes hesitated. Below lay occupied France. Any men who jumped risked capture, injury, or worse. Martinez was wounded. Could he even parachute? "Not yet," Hayes said. Above them, Howell scanned the sky. His 8.50 cals carried 3,400 rounds 34 seconds of steady fire, and he'd already spent 600. Now, he had maybe 28 seconds left. Movement at 2 o'clock caught his eye. 3 Bf 109 seconds closing in. Having spotted the straggler, Howell pushed the throttle forward and turned sharply to place himself between the bomber and the fighters. The P-47's massive R2800 engine howled as the Thunderbolt surged past 300 knots. The lead Messerschmitt broke left too late. Howell opened fire, all 8 guns hammering, brass cascading from the wings. Tracers tore into the 109, shattering its canopy and ripping metal from its cowling. Coolant sprayed out as the fighter flipped and fell, trailing smoke. The other 2 Germans pulled away and climbed, stunned by the ferocity of the defense. Reforming at 25,000 feet, they reconsidered their chances. Inside the B-17, the crew heard Howell's guns and knew someone was guarding them. "Jersey, thanks for the save," Hayes transmitted. "But you're burning fuel. You should go home." "Negative, big friend," Howell answered. "You've got company all the way to the fence. The channel 90 miles away. At 140 knots, that meant 38 minutes. Howell checked his fuel again. 42 minutes left. It would be dangerously tight. The bomber continued sinking to 0,000 feet. 19,000. Its three engines unable to maintain altitude with damage and open bomb bay doors, turning it into a flying brick. Passing through thin cloud at 18,000 feet, they flew blind for 30 seconds before emerging, and Howell instantly spotted 5 more Bf 109 seconds approaching in a tight V formation. Reinforcements. A coordinated attack. Howell angled straight at them, choosing a head-on pass, a move demanding absolute nerve, as both sides closed at over 500 knots. The Germans hesitated. This lone Thunderbolt had already downed one of theirs. At 3,000 yards, Howell fired, not aiming to kill but to disrupt the formation, to force them to scatter and spoil their attack run. Tracers stitched the sky, and the lead fighter broke away, followed by the rest. Howell dove beneath them, rolled, inverted, and came up on the tail of a trailing 109, landing more hits and sending it limping off, smoking. But 2 Messerschmitts swung around to strike the bomber from behind. Tail gunner Walt Kendrick fired a burst, but his twin 50s jammed after 4 rounds. As he fought to clear them, Howell banked into a brutal high G turn, vision dimming at the edges as he forced the heavy P-47 into position. At 600 yards, he opened fire again. The German never saw him. 50 caliber rounds and 20 mm impacts ripped through the fighter's wing root, tearing the wing completely off. The aircraft tumbled into the clouds below. The remaining Germans fled east. 3 fighters lost or damaged in 5 minutes was too steep a price. Silence followed, only engines and whined through torn metal. Hayes drew one deep breath. "Jersey 27, you just saved our lives." Howell didn't answer right away. His fuel gauge read 28 minutes. The channel was still 65 miles ahead, and the bomber had dropped to 16,000 feet, still sinking. Morrison looked over at Hayes and finally said, "We're not going to make it, are we?" Hayes studied the instruments: altitude, airspeed, fuel left in tanks 1 and 2, and oil pressure on the 3 functioning engines, every dial telling the same grim truth. The numbers didn't lie. "We'll make it to the channel," he said, leaving the rest, and said, because after that, they'd be ditching into freezing water and praying RAF rescue launches found them before hypothermia did. Survival time in the October North Sea was only 20 minutes. Above them, Howell faced his own calculations: 23 minutes of fuel left, 58 miles to the English coast, and only 24 minutes of flight time at their present speed. He'd run dry 1 minute short of safety. So he pulled the throttle back to minimum cruise, leaned the mixture for maximum economy, and adjusted propeller pitch to squeeze out every second he could. Below, the French countryside slid by: villages, farm fields, roads crawling with German trucks, and all of it enemy territory. The bomber dropped through 15,000 feet. The fire in engine 3 had burned itself out, leaving only the enormous drag of a windmilling prop and torn cowling. Hayes trimmed the aircraft, but the controls felt heavy and sluggish as their hydraulics faded. At 13,000 feet, Howell flew close, weaving in a protective S pattern, eyes constantly scanning sky and fuel gauge. Knowing every German fighter in northern France had probably been alerted to their crippled bomber. At 12,000 feet, they punched through clouds, and Morrison spotted the threat: first 6 fighters, 10 o'clock high, diving in perfect formation from 17,000 feet. Hayes felt his gut clench. 6 Bf 109 seconds, a hunting pack assembled to finish them. Howell saw them too. 6 against 1, with barely 20 seconds of ammunition. He shoved the throttle forward, fuel be damned, and climbed, firing at 1,200 yards, not for hits, but to break their formation. It worked. The attack pattern shattered as 2 fighters veered left, 2 right, 2 straight ahead. Howell closed on the rightmost 109, firing at 400 yards. The tail blew apart, and the fighter spun away, but the other 5 pressed from multiple angles. 2 dived on the bomber from 7 o'clock high, cannon fire flashing from their wings. Tail gunner Kendrick cleared his jam in time to rip into the lead attacker, sending it smoking away, but the second fighter stitched the bomber's left wing with 20mm shells. One round struck the nearly empty No. 2 fuel tank. Vapors ignited and flames burst from the wing. Morrison triggered the co-system, killing the fire, but the engine was ruined and the prop seized. Now, they were down to 2 engines as altitude slipped past 11,000 feet. Hayes fought the rolling, drag-heavy aircraft while Morrison shouted that they needed to bail, but Hayes refused. Jersey was still with them. Indeed, he was. Howell was locked in a savage dogfight at 10,000 feet. His P-47 hit twice, but saved by armor, 1 shell missing his fuel tank by inches. He downed another 109 with an impossible deflection shot, the fighter exploding into an orange fireball before the remaining 3 Germans finally broke off, low on fuel after losing 3 aircraft. Howell rejoined as the bomber dropped through 9,000 feet with only 11 minutes of fuel left. The channel was 42 miles away, needing 18 minutes of flight, 7 minutes too many. He radioed, "Big friend, I'll have to leave soon. Fuel critical." Hayes told him to go, but Howell refused. In the bomber, Morrison whispered that Howell would die trying to save them, and Hayes knew it was true. If Howell stayed, he'd run out of fuel over enemy lines, bail out or crash, and become a POW. At 8,000 feet, their descent increased to 300 feet per minute, too fast. They'd hit the water before the coast if they didn't reach England, and ditching a shattered bomber offered maybe a 30% chance of survival in calm seas, worse in their condition. Donnelly used the last hydraulics to crank the landing gear down, just in case they made England. At 7,000 feet the French coast appeared, then 35 miles of cold gray water, then England beyond. Howell's fuel needle touched the red. 8 minutes left. Flak erupted as they passed Dieppe. Shrapnel tore into the fuselage, wounding Briggs in the thigh, though not badly. At 6,000 feet, they crossed the coast and flew over the channel. Dark water, whitecaps, 50-degree temperature, 20-minute survival window. Howell checked fuel again. 5 minutes left. With the English coast still 28 miles away, he'd run dry 12 miles short. So he made his choice. "Big friend, I'm heading for the deck. I'll ditch near you. Better rescue odds together." Hayes immediately understood. Instead of turning back to France and becoming a prisoner, Howell was choosing to ditch in the channel beside them, risking death to stay. "Negative, Jersey," Hayes said. "You can still make France." But Howell answered, "Not leaving you. We go home together or not at all." Inside the bomber, the crew heard everything. 10 men realizing what he was sacrificing. The crew who had accepted their likely deaths suddenly felt hope again. Someone was staying with them, and they weren't alone. At 5,000 feet, Howell descended beside the bomber, matching its rate of descent, while his fuel gauge warned he had barely 3 minutes left. Once the engine quit, he'd have perhaps 90 seconds of glide before hitting the water. At 4,000 feet, Hayes scanned the horizon desperately, but saw no rescue boats or ships, only empty ocean. At 3,000 feet, Howell's engine coughed, the first sign of starvation, and he switched tanks hoping to squeeze out another few seconds. At 2,000 feet, Hayes began the ditching checklist as Morrison read off each item in a calm, professional voice. "Prepare for water landing. Assume crash positions. Impact in 90 seconds. In the tail, Kendrick strapped in tight. In the radio room, Donnelly braced against the bulkhead. In the waist compartment, Briggs and the others wedged themselves between the racks. In the ball turret, Martinez rotated horizontal and tried to climb out, knowing it would become a death trap in a water landing. At 1,000 feet, Howell's engine coughed again, longer this time, the propeller windmilling before power briefly returned. Hayes lined into the wind, trying to reduce impact speed, and the bomber sank through 800, 700, 600 feet. Then Howell's engine died for good, the sudden silence jarring after hours of deafening operation. The P-47 instantly became a heavy, poor gliding brick, and Howell pushed the nose down to maintain just enough airspeed to avoid stalling or cartwheeling across the surface. At 400 feet, Hayes flared the bomber, the nose rising as airspeed bled away 120 knots, 110, 100 before the aircraft smashed into the water. The impact was violent, rivets ripping, seam splitting, water erupting upward as the bomber skipped twice and slid to a halt, the airframe groaning as it settled. Inside, the crew was thrown brutally forward. Vickers felt his shoulder dislocate, and Martinez, still halfway out of the turret, was crushed when it collapsed on impact. Water poured through 100 cracks as Hayes yelled for everyone to get out. Morrison kicked open the escape hatch, dragging Hayes with him. They tumbled onto the wing as the bomber sank, tilting left as water rushed in 2 minutes at most before it went under. 200 yards away, Howell fought his own battle as the P-47 hit the surface nose first at 90 knots, the massive engine dragging the aircraft violently into a forward flip. Howell smashed into the gun sight, blood streaming down his face as freezing water flooded in. Shock numbed his limbs, but he found the canopy release, pulled it free, and fought upward through the torrent while the sinking fighter tried to pull him under. He surfaced, gasping, and spotted the bomber 400 yards away, rafts deploying as men leapt clear. Inflating his life vest, he swam toward the nearest raft, each stroke agony in the numbing cold, until hands pulled him aboard. Hayes stared at him in disbelief. "Jersey, you crazy bastard, you actually did it." Howell shivered too hard to speak as someone wrapped him in a blanket. They counted heads, 8 in one raft, 3 in another, 11 men. The entire bomber crew plus Howell. Everyone had survived except Martinez. When Hayes asked, Donnelly answered quietly, "He never made it out of the ball turret." Hayes closed his eyes. 9 saved, 1 lost. The cruel math of war. They drifted in the freezing channel for 18 long minutes, men praying, crying, or staring silently at the gray sky, until finally an RAF rescue launch arrived. Hayes insisted Howell be taken aboard first, telling the British sailors, "This man stayed with us for 90 miles, fought off 20 fighters, ran out of fuel, and ditched alongside us. He saved 9 lives today." The British captain looked at the shivering pilot and nodded approvingly. "Well done, Yank." 3 days later, Howell received the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism against enemy forces, with Hayes and his crew standing proudly at attention as the medal was pinned to his chest. Years later, when Hayes was asked about that day, he said they all knew they were dead until the pilot in the P-47 decided otherwise, staying when he should have left, fighting impossible odds, and ditching in the ocean rather than abandoning them. "That's not courage," Hayes said. "That's something beyond courage. I don't have a word for it." Howell returned to civilian life and rarely spoke of the medal, but the bomber crew never forgot. Every year until Howell's death in 1998, he received Christmas cards from the families of the men he'd saved. 9 lives, 90 miles, 1 decision that defined what it meant to be a warrior. These men understood sacrifice in a way few ever will, flying into fire because someone had to, staying when others would flee, because brothers never abandon brothers. If this story moved you, honor their memory by subscribing and sharing these stories so they're never forgotten. Next time, you'll hear about the B-24 pilot who landed his burning bomber to save his trapped crew. Until then, remember,